Welcome, everyone. My name is Lori Schreier, a member of New Hampshire for Safe Technology. I've been active on these issues for several years after becoming aware of my own sensitivity to wireless radiation and then learning the science. New Hampshire for Safe Technology's focus right now is to educate as many New Hampshire residents as possible about the risks of wireless technology and safer solutions, and to build support for passage of protective legislation, especially the protective measures proposed by the New Hampshire Commission to study the environmental and health effects of the emerging 5G technology. Their report came out in November 2020, and they had many recommendations for protective measures. And so at this point, House Bill 1644 is one of those proposals that is before the legislature, and you'll hear more about that today. And we hope to see passage of that legislation when it comes out of an interim committee. At this point, I'd like to welcome and introduce Cece Doucette, our friend and mentor, who is the presenter for all of these webinars that we're doing with for New Hampshire for Safe Technology. I'll tell you a little bit about Cece. Cece helped her children's school to become the first in the nation to take precautionary measures with wireless technology. She's also the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology and works with schools, communities, municipalities, and legislatures to address wireless radiation in public health. She's also the Educational Services Director with the international nonprofit Wireless Education, which offers affordable 30-minute online trainings for schools and families and corporate safety induction. Cece was honored to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference at the National Institutes of Health, and to present state and local policy at the International EMF Medical Conference in 2021. She has been featured on Genius of Wellness, Boston 25 News, PBS, EMF Warriors, in EMF Summits with Lloyd Burrell, Josh Jasol, and Patrick Vanderbert. And she was featured she was one of the speakers in the film Generation Zapped and Wi-Fi Refugees. We're very happy to have Cece here once again to help us understand the science. Thanks, Cece.
Thank you so much, Lori. And Lori, I want to thank you especially for the work that you've done in New Hampshire. You've been there at the State House testifying with us in the past, and you did a really remarkable job of taking municipal leaders in Keene, New Hampshire, who knew nothing about wireless technology and the inherent risks, walking them through what these issues are, opening up public conversation, and helping them to take a look at their local zoning bylaws. So thank you so very much for everything you've done there. And I'm honored to be with you here tonight. What I'd like to start with is a screen share. And can you give me a nod if you can see that? Okay. So when we're done after tonight, when Jen has a chance to post this video up online, I'll provide her with my slides. And then anything that's in my slides that has an underline in it, you will be able to click right into the supporting materials. So you'll get to go in and drill through the science, the medical recommendations, and the solutions to have excellent technology, but without the wireless radiation risks. So as Lori noted, I, like many joining the conversation today, had no idea there was anything to even look at with wireless technology until a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped us off that there could be something up biologically. So that's where my journey began back in 2013. And I brought this issue forward to my local schools here in Ashland, Massachusetts. And by the time they did their due diligence, we wound up being the first public school district in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms that says to turn off the devices when we're not using them, or at least put them in airplane mode so that we're not radiating the children and the staff. Always turn the Wi-Fi off, the wireless access points, and unless you have to use them, choose hardwired technology. And as we'll go through in a moment, the legal fine print even tells us in our own devices to keep these devices away from our bodies and to create distance. So we'll go through some of that. As Lori mentioned, I've helped to introduce legislation in Massachusetts, and I was so honored to meet Deb Hodgson, who's here on the call with us today. And Deb is the woman in New Hampshire who got the ball rolling on this issue with Representative Patrick Abrami. And the two of them hopped in his car and drove down to my home in Massachusetts. And we sat at my table for an afternoon in my kitchen and just helped him to connect the dots. And he introduced our country's most incredible bill on wireless radiation and the need to address protections. And we'll go through those details shortly. So Deb Hodgson, we owe a huge debt of gratitude for your brilliance and your persistence in not just walking away from this issue when you figured out how sick it made you. I do have this little nonprofit, Wireless Education. We're revamping our platform right now and expect to be back online next month. But we've literally built training. We could train an entire school district, an entire workforce, an entire municipal organization in about a half an hour online. So we're all about solutions. My mom raised 10 of us and taught us, if you identify a problem, please be sure to be part of the solution. So we are solutions-based, and we hope to help you find those solutions tonight. And here out at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, I've got a lot of resources listed that anybody is welcome to go out and look at the science, look at what's happening at the federal level, at the local level, at the state level. And then here's that technology panel that I co-hosted down at the National Institutes of Health. I like to share this link with people because we only had about 10 minutes each to say what we came there to say. And I was so fortunate to have one of the world's leading scientists, Dr. Martin Pall, join us on that panel. Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, who came to tell us what this issue is, and that given a nudge, industry can absolutely do better. And then Theodora Scarrato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, and her organization and others just sued the FCC for allowing these toxic levels of microwave radiation. So excellent short videos here for anybody who's interested in hearing from other experts. One other thing I want to mention in here, Peter Sullivan joined us, and he is the director of a philanthropy group called Clearlight Ventures. Peter used to be a fighter pilot, and so he was up in the stratosphere there with all these high levels of the Earth's electromagnetic fields. He was also in a plane that had all this radar mounted on the outside and then all the instrumentation on the inside. Peter wound up getting really sick. And then he had two little boys. And as each of his sons came on to the preschool years, both of them were on the autism spectrum. And Peter figured out how to rebuild his own health to a certain point, but it wasn't until he figured out the wireless radiation issue that he actually began to rebuild his health. And then, as most parents of children with autism do, you'll clean out the diet, get on an organic diet, you'll remove the heavy metals. But when Peter removed the radio frequency radiation exposures from today's wireless technology, when he removed that from his home and created a sleep sanctuary, his children both recovered from autism. And I didn't even know that was an option. I didn't know that for some, you don't have to be autistic if you clean up the environmental assaults. And that's for those who have de novo mutations. They oftentimes recover or make very serious strides toward better well-being. So interesting talks here from the National Institutes of Health. And then, as Lori mentioned, when I fell down the rabbit hole back in 2013, we had so many people getting misdiagnosed. And as several people on the call tonight can tell you, when you become electromagnetically harmed, you go to your doctors, they run the tests they know to run. They come up empty. And then you start paying thousands of dollars out of pocket to go find an expert, maybe a specialist. They run their tests and come up empty. And for the fortunate ones who founded New Hampshire for Safe Technology, they figured out through their own research that wireless radiation was the culprit in their case. And by removing the exposures, they were able to rebuild their health. So that is often happening all over the country, all over the world, where people are being misdiagnosed, and we had no way to train our healthcare teams to know any better. Today, we have the Electromagnetic Fields, or EMF, medical conference, and it was just reapproved to continue this online professional training for 24.5 continuing medical education credits for doctors. And we went through the sister process for nurses and got the CEs, or the continuing education credits for nurses. So if we are not speaking to our doctors, if we're not speaking to our nurses, if we're not speaking to our first responders, people are going to continue to be misdiagnosed. So we hope that everybody will go take a look at this medical conference. And there's a trailer there for 2 minutes that will give you the gist of it. And the price has been brought down so low to try and cover our expenses, because it was really expensive to put this medical conference on with international experts. But we've dropped the price so low because we just want the public to know that this exists, and then our healthcare teams to be aware of it so that they can be trained. So that's my background. This MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's of technical and professional writing at Northeastern University. And I'm so honored to be able to use my skill set today to do this work that none of us ever imagined we'd be in. But I'm grateful to have the skill set to be able to share with you what we're going to go through now. So when my schools became the first in the nation to start taking precautionary measures with, our little sign that hangs in all of our classrooms, it wasn't until they read the legal fine print. And if anybody has an iPhone with you today, I welcome you to take that out and to go into your settings. There's also a website here while you're getting that set up. There's a website that has a lot of fine print disclaimers on it through the Environmental Health Trust. But once you're in settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit general. On a really old phone, you'd hit about, but I think most people have updated their phones. So from general, go all the way down and hit legal and regulatory near the bottom. Once you're in legal and regulatory, up at the top, you'll see a little list, and 4 or 5 down, you'll see RF exposure. That RF exposure stands for radio frequency radiation, that they politely call energy in this disclaimer. And they tell us 2 really important things. One is keep this device at a distance from your body, because if you exceed that distance, you will exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure, which, as we'll discover momentarily, were never safety tested for biological harm. And then the next paragraph tells us to use a hands-free option, because by simply holding your phone the way that they give it to you, you are now exposing yourself to radiation from 5 or 6 separate antennas. There's a cellular, a data, a Wi-Fi, a locator, a hotspot, a Bluetooth. And for anybody who didn't know any better and has already upgraded to a 5G phone, there's an array of additional antennas in there that are constantly trying to make a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router, going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? In the millimeter, or in the megahertz range, it does that 1 million times per second. In the gigahertz range, it does that 1 billion times per second. So that's a spike of erratic pulsed microwave radiation that's hitting our cells very rapidly all the time, unless we simply learn to use it more safely. And if you do choose a headphone, like they suggest in that fine print, you'd be well advised to look for something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And this is one, it's just got rubber and plastic. There's no metal going up to your head. And we've learned that metal amplifies radiation. So you don't want any metal conducting. This wire would be plugged into your phone or your device, but it has these beads here, these ferrite beads that break the radiation and then just carry acoustically the sound coming from your device. So you'd want to set the phone as far away from you as you can and only use it for as short an amount of time as you can and do everything else through a hardwired connection on your computer. So I had a hard time getting my mind around something that was invisible. And then I discovered there are radio frequency radiation detection meters. And I will share with you the one that was recommended at the medical conference for doctors to put into their medical practice and loan out to their patients. And there's a Dr. Erin Acevedo here in Massachusetts. She bought one and she gives it to her patients. She lets them take it out for $10 and then requires that they bring it back in 2 hours. That's just long enough for them to go home, measure what their radiation exposures are and where they're coming from, and get it back to her office so they don't delay and then she can't use it with another. So here in my house, knowing what I know about radio frequency radiation, you'll see that I'm in the green here. And the reading that I'm getting for these spikes of radiation, mine are at 2.96, and the unit of measurement is called a microwatt per square meter. And so just remember that I'm just under 3. And then I want to give you a demonstration of what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode, because I keep it in airplane mode as a rule, and I only use it in emergencies on the road. Everything else I do through my hardwired computer and my landline at home. So we can see that this from one phone, I'm going to put it back in airplane mode so I don't radiate myself any longer. One phone turned on with the antennas pulsating. We went from 3 microwatts per square meter to 438,000. The scientific literature indicates that we should be at less than 10 or less in our indoor spaces. And in our sleeping areas, we should be at 0.1 microwatts per square meter. Otherwise, this radiation impairs our body's ability to do cell repair and regeneration while we sleep. Our brain thinks the lights are on because this is an invisible light energy. And our brain's waiting to get to the wee hours of darkness to release melatonin to go in and regulate our sleep, but also clear out the toxins of the day. So when I figured out there was something that could measure this invisible radiation, I went after a grant in my town, and we became the first here in Ashland, Massachusetts to put one of these meters on loan. We got this one a few years back. So our residents can take this out, go through their homes, go through their offices, go through their cars and their schools, and get the data. What is the baseline? What are we exposed to? And then what can we do? And we'll talk about that too. I met a doctor from Newton, Massachusetts at the first medical conference in 2019, and she and I came back home and went after a grant from the state to put a meter in her library. And out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon has turned on a cell tower right on top of a neighborhood that made 20 children and adults sick, and the pollinators disappear, they now have one in their public library too. So these are good community level ideas that you can take back to your town to say, okay, well, technology's here. Let's see how we can use it safely, and let's measure what our exposures are. My local cable station was very gracious to come into my home, and I did a 23-minute public service announcement, just walking through a typical home today to show what the radiation exposures are from our keyboard, from our mouse, from our printer, from our microwave oven, from our tablets, from the decked cordless phone. So all this cumulative radiation. how much radiation is it? And then I offer suggestions for how to remediate. So what does the science tell us? First, we'll look at the long-term effects, and then we'll look at the short-term effects. So this study over here, or I'm sorry, this study here from the US National Toxicology Program was done over a 20-year period when cell phones were the technology of the day with 2G and 3G. They went expecting to prove that cell phones are fine. And instead, what they found is there was clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories that they could assign. So this is the world's leading toxics organization saying clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage. And what the industry will do when a good study comes out is say, oh, that was just one study. You need more studies to prove any harm. Well, right on the heels of our government study, the Ramazzini Institute completed another large study from cell towers and came up with the same findings of cancers and DNA damage that we found here in the US. So we don't need more science. What we need is political will and an educated public to work through this and start transitioning to safe technology. DNA damage, which we know is the foundation for growing a proper anything, whether it be a human or a plant or an animal or a biome, we're damaging the very roadmap to do proper biology today. The infertility studies are what got me on my feet. I started reading the peer-reviewed scientific literature, and they have taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas on. It changed the DNA, it slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. And I had just given my youngest daughter a laptop to go into high school with. Her older sister was up in college with a MacBook right on top of her reproductive system. So that was the day that I found my voice and started speaking to my schools about this and started speaking to my legislators about this, because the science is very clear. We just don't get the science in mainstream media. As most of you know today, even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression among both adults and children. And we were seeing suicide rates among kids like we have never seen before. The science links this also to ADD and ADHD, to autism, because it's a neurotoxin, and to Alzheimer's. And just last month, Dr. Martin Pall came out with a new study, a review of, I think, 18 different research papers that have come out linking this to early, very early onset Alzheimer's. It used to take 25 years for the symptoms to start showing up. People would start getting Alzheimer's in their 70s or their 80s. Now we're seeing it in the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, and even among some 20-year-olds. So this is terribly important that we get our minds around this. And children, as this diagram shows, they're not just little adults. Dr. Om Gandhi did this study and the modeling. So these heads are turned sideways, the ears are the yellow part. When you put a cell phone up to an adult head, it's penetrating the brain about 1/3 of the way through. When you do the same thing to a child's head who's about 10 years old, it goes about 2/3 of the way into their brain. And on a 5-year-old, this radiation is penetrating almost their entire brain. And we are seeing learning deficits and delays in developmental milestones. Children's brains have a higher water content and their skulls are thinner. So literally, biologically, they are absorbing more radiation than you and I, and it's no good for you and I. In the short term, many of you may recognize the symptoms we're going to discuss next. So we should know that we have this term called electromagnetic sensitivities. This is, we are bioelectrical beings, right? And when we pour on this huge amount of man-made radiation on top of our own electrical systems, it's very easy to become overwhelmed by it. The Americans with Disabilities Act already has statements out on their websites. They recognize this. But here's what people are suffering today. Insomnia is a huge one because, as I mentioned, if we don't know any better and we're sleeping with our cell phones, we're sleeping with our tablets, we've got Roku and Chromecast and Ring and Alexa, baby monitors, gaming devices, and then the Internet of Things that's putting these radio frequency antennas in every appliance that they're trying to sell us today. It's no wonder that people don't sleep right anymore. But the beautiful thing is that once they get a little education like we're delivering tonight, they'll come back and they'll say, Cece, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to believe it. And I'm like, yeah, well, welcome to the club. None of us did. But they'll say, some of what you said started ringing true. So I turned everything off last night and oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time in ages. And it can be that simple for a lot of people. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches that doctors can't figure out, migraines, nosebleeds or ear bleeds, chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources, skin heating, flushing, rashes, tingling. That's my tell. If I'm holding an active cell phone, my pinky finger starts to get numb and my ear will tingle before I knew to never put it back up to my head again. My ear would tingle and get hot and I would get off like my decked cordless phone at home. If I was calling my mom out on the other coast, we would talk for an hour or two and I would get off and I go, dang, my head feels so wonky. Well, what I didn't know at the time is I was radiating my brain. Irregular heartbeats that go too fast or too slow based on your own biological makeup. Cognitive impairment is huge. And naturally, as we age, it begins to decline. But this is exacerbating the cognitive impairment, not only in the elderly, but in other people as well. It was so disheartening at that medical conference to hear the doctors say that with these societal outbursts that we've seen, if we continue to radiate the public at this level, we can expect to see more of those outbursts. And they were talking about the mass shootings and other things because the science shows this changes the gray matter of the brain and it impacts our decision making. And as I mentioned, the anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. I wanted to just point out that Dr. Martin Pall put out this paper a few years ago that talks about the widespread neuropsychiatric effects. So everything we say is backed up by science. Don't take anything at face value. You will hear a lot of disinformation from the wireless industry, the telecom industry. So it's up to each of us to go do our due diligence. And my hope is that we can present you with these slides so that you can go in and do that and then make your personal choices. And then at some point, try and help your community. So as I mentioned, it's not just you and I. If you go to this Planetary Impact link, you'll find excellent science out there on what we're doing to our pollinators, to our birds, to our, the bees, the butterflies. They have built within their brains and their beaks a natural navigation system that is meant to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic field. And now what we've done is we've introduced this humongous layer of man-made radio frequency that oftentimes, if it's not outright killing them, because now these little millimeter waves and the bigger waves, the little ones especially are the same size as our poor little insects, and it can completely overpower them. But it can also disrupt the navigation systems where they can't find their way back to the migratory paths, and the bees can be disoriented and not be able to get back to their hives, or we've seen that they will swarm if there's an upset by a cell tower, a cell phone, if there's a router nearby, a smart meter nearby. So this is very serious to our whole ecology. And then when we look at climate change and energy consumption, there's a Greenpeace analyst who 10 years ago said if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And they're already saying now that wireless technology through all of the networks, all of the data warehouses, and all of our personal use patterns consumes 3 to 4 times, or I'm sorry, 10 times more energy than the simple solution of simply running everything back through wires, where you'll have a much better connection, much more secure and much more reliable. So energy consumption is huge. The atrocities that are happening to get the many, many different kinds of minerals that have to go into each one of our devices. If you knew what was happening to people down in the Congo, to children, to women, to men, you would never just cast aside your perfectly good cell phone because they're pushing you into a shinier object. So again, this is what's using up so much energy. And the industry is pushing 5G now to have streaming and faster downloads and smart cities and super highways, but it's a huge energy consumer. Every time we send and receive, every time we have to charge and recharge and recharge and recharge, instead of just using a hardwired connection, we are consuming energy. And in the background on all of our devices, every one of those apps is doing their updates and using energy in the background. And I would be willing to bet that for most of us, there's only a couple that we actually ever really use, and the rest are just on there because we got talked into it at some point. So when I was analyzing all this, I'm looking at all this science and I'm saying, well, surely if this is as bad as the science is telling me, somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came up with this free online 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. So this is how it happened. People from industry. Tom Wheeler was first the head of the cable industry, then he was head of the telecom industry, and then he became the head of the FCC. The next guy who came on was Ajit Pai. He used to be a senior lawyer from Verizon. And now we have an opportunity to start trying to get new nominees into the FCC who perhaps won't be so favorable to industry. So these reports are available for you to read. And when I mentioned that $30 million study that our government did, it was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration 2 decades ago by other people. Today, the gentleman who's in charge of the radiation control area at the FDA is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. After that $30 million study concluded clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage, that should have been the trigger to translate that into public policy to protect the public. Instead, Dr. Shuren went over to Ajit Pai at the FCC and said, oh, everything's fine. We don't need to reduce those public radiation exposure limits. And one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? Well, when we look into his background, he's had industry favoritism on a lot of issues, a lot of chemicals and telecom, but his wife is married, or he is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry to the tune of billions of dollars. So we have conflicts of interest all the way throughout our federal agencies, which is why it's so important to address this at the state and local level. But so that's all the bad news, right? There is so much good news happening. But what I want to do first is take you from where you are. Somewhere in your home, you have a connection coming off the street and into your home, and it's connected to a router. The next time you go down and look at your router, flip it around and you'll see that it has Ethernet jacks in it, right? Ethernet ports. All you need to do is get a big long Ethernet cable and run it to wherever you use your technology in your home. Most of us use more than one device. So maybe you use a cell phone, maybe you use a tablet or a laptop. This is just a little Ethernet switch. Think of it as like an extension cord for electronics. All you need to do is plug one cable from your router into here, and then get little cables for your personal devices and plug them into here. The beauty of it is each one of these holes will give you your own internet line. So you're not having to compete so heavily, like you do with wireless. Oh, gee, I can't get on, so-and-so's on in the house. I can't get a good connection. It keeps dropping. Hardwire, and you will have much better technology. And who knew? For those of you with a cell phone, you can buy a little adapter for like $20, $30 for your cell phone, for your laptop, your tablets. And then you just need to go into each one and turn off the antennas in the settings. And then I called up my internet service provider and said, hey, I've chosen to hardwire my house. How do I get that triple play that we have for phone, for internet, and for cable? How do I get that thing to stop radiating? And they just showed me how to get online into my account. And I went into wireless settings and turned off the antennas. And it was that simple. And then I measured again. And sure enough, no radiation in my home. So at home, I mentioned I use a landline, and you can forward cell phone calls to a landline, right? So lots of great resources here. And for most of us, it won't break the bank to actually have excellent, superior technology once we get our minds around that mind shift that we were sold on wireless for the convenience without being told the biological risks. So let's look at where the radiation comes from aside from our personal devices. A few years back, our utility companies got sold on the idea that we should have wireless transmitters on all of our utility meters for electrical, for water, for gas, for solar, for propane now. Lori just discovered recently they had put a radio frequency transmitting device on her propane tank, and thankfully her utility company said, oh no, we can come take that right off. So, but the problem we have is that the electric companies and the gas companies are not that accommodating in many states. And these meters, if it's got an FCC ID number on it, it is pulsing radiation continuously. The utility companies will say, oh, it just transmits for a couple seconds a day. Well, I took my meter and I did a little 3-minute video for my Department of Public Utilities here in Massachusetts when we had a hearing. And mine clocked in at 17,000 pulses of microwave radiation in a 24-hour period. So it's really critical to be able to measure these to find out just where the truth lies. Another risk is that when you have radiation around metal, it can hop on the house wires and the pipes, virtually turning your home into one giant radio frequency radiating antenna. And we know far too many people who've become ill from this. Other issues are fires, explosions from improper grounding. And for those concerned with data privacy, the reason why they're going to these smart meters is to be able to harvest your private data and then turn around and sell it to others who would want to sell you product. In a more nefarious setting, a hacker out at the curb with $100 application could intercept your data and know by your patterns when you're home and when you're not home, and they can back up the truck and take all your toys, right? But here's where our heart really lies, is this child sleeping on the other side of a wall where a smart meter is mounted. Time and again, people start having neurological issues. They can't sleep, they get anxiety, they get depression. Some of it is reversible, some of it winds up not being. So this is a very serious issue with these smart meters. And at the medical conference, they said that this was one of the leading causes of sudden onset of microwave sicknesses. And out here in Worcester, Massachusetts, National Grid came in and did a pilot program that our Attorney General got involved with because of the cost overruns, but they didn't know about the biological effects. And in the environmental justice fashion, these industries will bring their toxic products into a community that is by and large underserved, where people might be working 2 or 3 jobs just to get food on the table and a roof over their heads. And they don't have time to tune into any of these issues. So they'll go in and say, oh, look, we were successful in Worcester. Now we're going to do this all over the state. So we really need to get on top of these smart meters. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer. His wife is a medical doctor. A bank of these smart meters went on at their condo, and he and his wife both got very ill and couldn't figure it out until they traced it back to these smart meters. And Jeremy did a 15-minute TEDx talk, which is really good if anybody wants to watch that. The next source that's out of our control is cell towers. And it's critical to look at the non-industry funded science, because as I mentioned, every time a good study comes out, the industry will either block it from getting out in mainstream media, or they'll do their own study under conditions that deliberately show no harm, and then spin that and say, oh, isn't this the greatest technology ever? But what the science is telling us, and what the New Hampshire law identified, and now we have this bill, House Bill 1644, is that we should never, ever have any of this wireless infrastructure within 500 meters, which comes out to be 1,640 feet, of where we live, of where we work, of where we worship, of where we go to medical facilities, on our playing fields, our schools. None of this should have cell towers nearby. And for anybody who's especially sensitive, it should be a half a mile away. So that's what that bill is in New Hampshire, and that's why it's so critical that it get passed. There's a website called antennasearch.com where you can put in your address, and it will typically return a 3-mile radius and show you where most of these big cell antennas are. They used to be 300 feet up in the air in an industrial park. And now they've begun to encroach, getting closer and closer and closer. And now they're putting them up on buildings right where people are living. So this is very serious. This is a great tool to teach people how to identify where these big cell towers and antennas are. And for example, when I put in the State House address in Massachusetts and Boston, there were 70 cell towers and 1,184 of these big antennas within 1 mile of our State House, because they could not give us a 3-mile return because there were so many. So this is how densified this electrosmog has gotten. And now add in 5G. 5G is 5th generation technology. And they've used up all these longer wavelengths that allow the signal to come into your buildings. All that's left to monetize are these little tiny millimeter waves, and they will be added onto the existing infrastructure. So it's not replacing it. We are adding to it. The industry is promising that we're going to have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways. And what they're doing is they're buying up the entertainment industry as a new revenue stream while they put all this electro pollution right where we live and work and play. And this is what some of them look like. Some of them are buried underneath manhole covers. Some are strung up on wires in our communities. Every vendor is doing it a little bit differently. So another atrocity is that they'll come in and clear cut the trees so that the radiation can get past, because these little millimeter waves are derailed by leaves, by snowflakes, by rain. And their goal is to put in millions of these at the curb right outside our bedrooms in the public access way, every 2 to 12 houses. And when we were testifying at the State House in January and February, there was a woman who just retired as a librarian, and her husband was retiring, and they looked forward to spending their time right in downtown Keene. They bought a house there, and then come to find out there's a small cell going up right in her neighbor's yard, 90 feet from her bedroom. And these have no business being inside of our neighborhoods. So this is happening in real time, and that's why it's urgent that we get this bill passed in New Hampshire. So the kicker is, if this congressional hearing in DC, Connecticut's Richard Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, was sitting before a commerce hearing, and he said to 2 members of the wireless industry, so please tell us, how much money have you invested in independent science to prove that this is safe before deploying it? And neither one of those gentlemen could come up with anything. They said, basically, we don't know of any independent science that's been done. So Blumenthal said, so we're flying blind here as far as health and safety are concerned. So that's a 3-minute video that Environmental Health Trust put up for us. And then Computer World and others are saying 5G is a bad joke. We don't need it. We're not getting any better speeds than we already got with 4G, which was toxic enough. And then in January, Verizon announced that they're exposing 100 million people in our big cities to these 5G antennas. So this is happening in real time. We should also know that this radio frequency radiation is an immunosuppressant. So when you densify a community with all this radiation that's pulsing day and night, our bodies don't have a chance. Our immune systems can never catch up. And so these doctors, Rubik and Brown, put out a paper based on science, based on the numbers of what's been installed in cities, and showing that there are much higher incident rates of COVID and death rates from COVID in these cities where the small cells have gone up. And so if we look at this map here, this is Boston, and every one of these polka dots is a small cell that's been put in addition to the thousands of the big antennas that we know were there already. So that's 5G. And Dr. Magda Havas up in Canada, she's Professor Emerita from Trent University. She recognizes that our governments have dropped the ball and nobody is measuring the cumulative effect of all this radiation. And this is one of the recommendations in the New Hampshire report is let's start gathering this data. So Dr. Havas is asking citizens around the world to use this meter and go out and follow her protocol so that we can see where might it be safer to live, or where are these towns really going to get themselves into big trouble here. So this is a great project that anybody is welcome and encouraged to participate in, and you can find more at globalemf.net. So I mentioned that indoors, we want to be at 10 or less. In the outdoor spaces, the science is showing that if we could get even to 1,000 microwatts per square meter, that might not be quite as bad. Now, there's no safe level of microwave radiation in the scientific literature, but even if we could get it down to 1,000 outdoors, presuming you get to go home and have a clean space to live in, that might not be so bad. So let's look at some readings. Westmoreland, New Hampshire Fire Department was in the green here at 417. Keene, New Hampshire, getting into the danger zone at 7,460. Nashua, 14,500. Concord. And Deb and I did this measurement during the pandemic where there weren't even many people out on the streets walking around with their devices or cars driving by with their cars radiating. So I would suspect once we're up into full swing in society, these numbers are going to be much higher. Stratham, we walked the strip down there and there was a giant cell tower there, 108,000. Here in the north end of Boston, a resident and I did a walkthrough, and it was up to 613,000 right on Hanover Street in the north end, where we have all of our beautiful Italian restaurants, many people living, working right above those restaurants. And the industry is putting in these nice looking wrought iron apparent lampposts that are actually small cell antennas inside that lamppost. So this is happening now and in real time. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that anytime we have a significant change in the social norm, it comes through 3 areas. And I'd like to give some really strong words of encouragement from these 3 areas. The public engages, which is what we're doing tonight. The courts rule and hold the guilty accountable. And the public policy catches up and helps to protect the public. So let me walk you through some excellent things that are happening. I'll touch on a few of them, but you can drill down later and look at more details if you'd like. For legal solutions, back in 2019, the FCC closed a docket that they had had open for many years. And in that docket, scientists, doctors, and the public poured in 11,000 pages of testimony showing the biological evidence of harm. As I mentioned, Dr. Jeffrey Shuren at the FDA told the FCC these radiation levels are fine. Once the FCC reaffirmed these toxic levels of radiation and filed that in something called the Federal Register, once that hit the Federal Register, the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and others sued the FCC for ignoring the science. And last August, on a Friday the 13th of August, the Ninth Circuit Court District in Washington, D.C. ruled, after looking at all this evidence, that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious in reaffirming these toxic levels of radiation. And they remanded it back to the FCC to do better. So that's where it is today. There's a group called the Irregulators that used to work for industry till they figured out the shell game that was going on. We long ago paid to have broadband brought to the premises so that we could all have excellent technology. When wireless became very cheap to install and quick and highly profitable, they took our money out of the wired broadband bucket and they put it in the wireless bucket, and they started using our money to throw up all this wireless infrastructure. So the Irregulators went after this and they sued the FCC and have apparently opened up the pathway for our states to go back and recoup that funding so that we can then have the funding to bring broadband right to the premises, where we just simply pick up indoors with these Ethernet cables, right? So again, it's not rocket science. Get an Ethernet cable, plug it into an adapter, and then just plug the adapter into your device and turn off the antennas. So there are excellent things happening in the courts right now. We know that the industry is going to try and drag this out longer and longer while the public gets sicker and sicker and more of our pollinators disappear. So there's a wonderful grassroots environmental education nonprofit that has a project called Americans for Responsible Technology. They have now filed a petition with the FDA declaring imminent hazard and asking the FDA to declare an imminent hazard, to say we need to address this and do the scientific review at a federal level that has never been done before. So good things happening. The Massachusetts Board of Health Association has legal guidelines, and they are telling our departments of public health, they are telling our town health boards, it is your job to protect the public. And they put in information about cell towers in there. And in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, after consulting their legal teams, they have issued an emergency order to Verizon to turn off that cell tower that was making so many people sick and the pollinators disappear. And tonight, their Board of Health is asking their city council for $84,000 to take it to the next level because Verizon refused to come to the table with the Board of Health. So now they're going to issue the cease and desist order, and they're asking their town for the funding to do that tonight. In the Face School in Massachusetts, this is a really prestigious international boarding school where like Saudi princes send their sons to be educated. And there was a little boy who kept getting sick for 2 years, and mom and dad would pick him up from school, take him to the doctors. They couldn't figure out what was going on. So they started noticing a pattern that on school break or summer vacation, his symptoms, the headaches, the nosebleeds, the nausea, the dizziness, the anxiety, the inability to concentrate, would all abate when he went back home on these breaks. As soon as he got back into school, after a day or two, everything came back. So they did their research and they figured out it was very likely the radiation, and they asked their schools for accommodations and the school wouldn't do it. They've got an international wait list, we understand, a mile long, and they're better known to disenroll families that raise any kind of an issue. So they wound up having to take this to the federal courts. And for the first time in the US, the courts recognized, yes, there are biological effects and they have nothing to do with heating tissue, which is what our FCC guidelines are still based on today. So there is harm at the non-thermal, low level, non-ionizing radiation exposure levels. So lots of good things happening in the courts, and there are many others that you could look at. But here we are in New Hampshire, and so very grateful for the groundwork that Deb Hodgson did, and for Representative Patrick Abrami, who's an engineer, and he was trained that you have to have heat to have harm. So when he was presented with the science, as a good public servant will do, he did the deep dive and went, wow, what are we doing here? So after he met with Deb and I, they came up with a bill, and he asked, why has the insurance industry put radio frequency exclusions in? Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, they will not cover damages from radio frequency electromagnetic fields. They've recognized this a long time ago. So who's left holding the bag on liability but our towns, right? Why does that legal fine print say to keep it off the body? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of peer-reviewed studies? Why do they only go for these thermal effects and not the biological effects? And why do we allow 100 times more radiation exposure than certain other countries do? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? I showed you what one cell phone does. What about a classroom with 20 or 30 kids in there, with wireless antennas on the ceiling, with a smart board, with 20 Chromebooks, 30 Chromebooks, all radiating at once? What are they doing to our school buses, putting wireless on the buses? What's happening at home with these children who've been issued a state-funded tablet with no technology safety information? And you know, a lot of those kids are sleeping with these, and we wonder why we have high rates of anxiety, depression, learning disabilities, autism, and more. So we came up and testified. We had other experts come in and testify, and New Hampshire passed a law in 7 months to investigate this, to form a commission. And they came out with this groundbreaking report. It is the best document in our nation. It's pretty fat. It's 390 pages, but I love the way that Rep. Abrami structured this, because in the first 17 pages, you will have their summary and findings and 15 recommendations for what we need to do. In New Hampshire, if everybody's not in agreement, then a minority report can be included inside the majority report. So there's 10 pages from the wireless industry. And it's kind of a gift, because it's right there in black and white what they continue to tell our towns and our legislators about all the great things about wireless. And there's a lot of half-truths in there and disinformation. So in the final meeting minutes, and a big shout out to Deb Hodgson, who gave so much of her time to take the minutes from all 13 sessions that this commission met. In the final meeting minutes, Senator Denise Ricciardi counters a lot of the disinformation that's in that minority report. So it's all in there. That is an excellent report that everybody should at least be reading the first 17 pages of. And so Dr. Kent Chamberlain was at the University of New Hampshire. He was the chair of the Electronics and Electrical Engineering Department, or Computer Engineering Department. He's worked with EMFs for 30 years, and he thought this would be a slam dunk. Like, of course, wireless is fine. But after learning the facts, he's done a complete about face, and now he's got excellent presentations with slides on the science that all of us can now access. So here's the current bill that we're hoping that will get passed sooner rather than later. This is House Bill 1644 that would establish these setbacks, and it is a bipartisan bill, and also include a registry of harm, because today so many people are getting sick and they have nowhere to go with that information. So they want the industry to pay for a statewide registry of harm for the public to put their information in, so we can start gathering data points on the harm. And here again is a 20-minute presentation that justifies why this setback and not something else. It's based on science. The hearings, we love that New Hampshire's legislature is so transparent that their hearings are all recorded and the public can participate and or watch the hearings on video. So this is things like this are happening all over the country, but the industry comes in, and when somebody says, well, we don't want a cell tower in our neighborhood, they're like, oh, they're just the NIMBY people, not in my backyard. There's nothing to it. It's all psychosomatic. And that's what they're telling people is this is your town, you're an isolated incident, but it's not true. This is happening all over the country. At Americans for Responsible Technology, there are more than 150 groups like New Hampshire for Safe Technology, Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and others who are mobilizing on this. So don't let anybody tell you you're alone. Please know you're not, and there are incredible resources to help. So we've got a lot of stuff that we've done successfully in Massachusetts. And towns, the city of Boston has already filed with the FCC on several dockets saying they believe the public that these radiation limits are not to be trusted. Boston joined with cities all over the country to sue the FCC on stripping them of local control. In Burlington, Massachusetts, they formed a technology committee, which every town should be doing today because technology is here to stay, and we need to learn how to do it properly and safely. They came up with a small cell policy that has now become a national example, and we can access this sample code and take that to every one of our towns and meet with our towns and the lawyers and say, here's a checklist. Where do we fall on this? What are we missing? And what can we do ASAP before they start giving us these cell tower antennas to put in at the curb for 5G? But what Burlington did is they said, the typical things, it's got to be ADA compliant, so it can't block a sidewalk or a pathway. It has to blend in with the environment. But then they said, you can't just drop and run. You've got to come back every year and recertify that this equipment is still viable according to current law. And we're going to assess you, telecom provider, a fee every year so that we can hire an independent consultant to do this annual recertification. And the night that they ratified that small cell policy, the Verizon lawyer was there and he said, well, my client doesn't wish to set a precedent for an annual recert or a fee because, mind you, they're planning to put millions of these in all over the country, and they don't want this cutting into their bottom line. So after doing presentations like we've done here tonight, the towns of Bedford, Lincoln, and Andover, Massachusetts are adopting the Burlington small cell policy and improving on it at every iteration. So please know you don't have to be the first one. We know how to do this, but you do have to speak up because our town volunteers and elected officials have no idea this is going on. All they know is they get a financial kickback for leasing out town property to put up these cell structures. So lots of good things have been happening here in Massachusetts, but they're happening all over. In Easton, Connecticut, a grandmother figured this out, took it to her town. They put a ban on 5G until it can be proven safe. Hawaii put a moratorium on 5G. They're trying to work it out legally, but at least it brought the attention level up. And the Environmental Health Trust has a whole database of actions that are happening like this all over the world. And then schools, my goodness. They are now targeting our schools to put these antennas right on the school property, on the buildings, on the playing fields, and giving the kids the tablets indoors so there's no escape. And look at what Silicon Valley execs are doing. They are sending their children to schools with no technology, not hardwired, not wireless, but no technology, because they know a child learns best from trusted adults, from their peers, and from their environment. They're even going so far as to make their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. So God bless our friends over at Grassroots Environmental Education who have Americans for Responsible Technology. During the pandemic, they have launched Tech Safe Schools, another national program. And you can go out there, they will send letters to your school teaching your administrators and your town lawyers what the biological and legal risks are. And also, of course, how to remediate and get to safe technology as quickly as possible. There's our little courses. The Environmental Health Trust has a wealth of very quick, easy, printable resources on how to get to safe technology. Maryland's Public Health Agency became the first in the nation to recommend hardwiring our schools. Dr. Tony Stein worked with this green school organization called the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools, and they now have a low EMF best practices module that our schools should be adopting before building a new school or while doing any kind of repairs and renovations. In Cyprus and in other countries during the pandemic, they came up with sets of instructions for how to study at home safely, hardwired the technology. And if you can't, at least keep like 16 feet away from the router. And they give guidelines. These kids should not be given these devices for unending use. They go age by age for what the recommended limits are, and do eye exercises and, you know, all these things that we need to have to safely use technology. And then the professional solutions we spoke of. Please, please, please tell your healthcare teams and your town's first responders that this training, professional accredited training, is now available. Dr. Cindy Russell at Physicians for Safe Technology also has an excellent website where healthcare professionals can get down to the actual science. We have resources for engineers, physicists, technologists, architects, and so on. Lots of great resources. And then for you and I at home and work, again, quick, easy training. For those who are not do-it-yourselfers, there's a profession called building biologists who are certified consultants. They've been trained. They can be brought into your home or do a consultation online to help you identify where your exposures are and then talk you through or come in and help you to get to safe technology. This award-winning film, Generation Zapped, has been screened at the Stratham Middle School or Junior High. It's been screened at the Keene Public Library and other locations throughout the Northeast. And in 74 minutes, it's a really good way to teach your loved ones and your colleagues and invite them into this conversation. It's non-threatening. It's got world-leading scientists and doctors. My work with the public schools here is featured for a few minutes there. But it's an excellent resource. It's available through Amazon Prime. If your library subscribes to Canopy with a K, Canopy, or Hoopla, then you can watch it for free through your library subscription. So that's a great way to bring everyone into your living room and just say, hey, I'm hearing something about this. Let's see what this is. And then Bert Wolf on PBS even did a couple of episodes on wireless radiation. And again, Americans for Responsible Technology has this incredible toolkit with flyers you could give to your neighbors. You can give them to your town. They've got the sample model code that you can use. They've got yard signs if you want them, if a cell tower is impending. So lots and lots of great resources here. So we need to remember that our kids are watching. They notice everything that we do. And if we are not being good role models, they're going to do what we do. And if we have our faces and our thumbs in our phones all the time, guess what? We've just given them permission to follow suit. So we need to model good behavior. I love this poster here, 50 ways to take a break, to remind us if we step away from our cell phone or our tablets, geez, what do we do now? Go out, go back to nature, less screen, more green, and listen to music, create music, go for a drive, go visit a friend, go help an elderly neighbor, go write some poetry, go journal, go hang out with your buddies, go play in the street with your friends, you know, all these things that we grow up doing that many kids today just simply don't do because they're screen bound for much of their time. One of the things I learned when I was investigating the science is there's another big body of science around grounding or earthing. And that basically means that every living thing is meant to be physically connected to the earth because we receive electrons up into our body that help to regulate our own bioelectrical systems. But now that we walk on rubber-soled shoes, and now that we drive on rubber sneakered cars and we sleep off the ground, we've largely disconnected from the earth, and it has incredible healing energy. This book by Dr. Laura Carniver takes it through all 4 seasons on how you can ground naturally, because here in the Northeast, We can't walk around barefoot for half the year. But who knew you could simply touch the high water content areas that are conductive on a plant, on a tree, on pine needles, the leaves, and you are instantly grounded and you get that healing benefit. So you might want to take a look at that too. So when you talk to your towns, or if you work for a town, please know there are incredible resources for you. On my website, we have a page for municipal leaders, and it's critical that we differentiate our public priorities from the industry's priorities. This book here, Reinventing Wires, The Future of Landlines and Networks, goes through a dozen reasons why it's a raw deal to get pushed into putting more wireless infrastructure into our towns. It's not sustainable when we have weather events. The cell towers go down. If it was just run underground and right to the building, much of that problem would go away. It's not sustainable. And so we need to get back to thinking about fiber optics or high-speed cable or copper right to the premises. The industry wants to just run the fiber or the cable down the middle of the road and then throw up these small cell antennas off of that when they need to bring it right to the home and skip all that wireless. Switzerland is already piloting doing this, so others are getting ahead of us, and we are falling way behind in the US because this is where the industry has been pushing their agenda. And always measure using biological effects, not those corrupt FCC guidelines. Right now, the Centers for Disease Control already has a principle that they call ALARA. And for ionizing radiation, which is the gamma rays and the sun and X-rays, you would never leave yourself or your loved ones exposed to any of that for any amount of time. So they have the ALARA principle for ionizing radiation to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And now it's time that we apply the ALARA principle to this man-made, low-level, non-ionizing radio frequency radiation. And in their ALARA principle, they go off of 3 tenets. One is only be exposed for the smallest amount of time that you need to be exposed. 2 is to create as much distance as you possibly can from a radiating antenna. And 3, use shielding where you can't get away from it. But when somebody puts a smart meter on your home, or somebody puts a cell tower outside of your home or on your rooftop, you don't have a choice. You can't get away from it. So that's why this New Hampshire legislation is so critical to start putting these stopgap measures in place. So for next step, again, there is no safe man-made radiation. Dr. Linda Birnbaum has now retired. She was the director of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. And she said that at the federal level, there are some really good people, but there are also a lot of captured agencies. So she suspects it's going to have to come up from the local and state level in order to force the federal level to change. And we need to get that bill enacted in New Hampshire. We need to educate the public, and we should not wait. We shouldn't wait for the legislation. We should be talking to every one of our towns today, because tonight those children and their parents could know to turn off the radiation at home and get a good night's sleep so your body can start repairing itself. So we will be doing these information sessions once or twice a month. And we love that you've joined us tonight for this one. We'll make the video available. Use it, go back and look at it as many times as you need to make sense of this. Look at our slides and drill down. Make sure you have a comfort level with this, and then start inviting others into the conversation, because this is how change happens, from the grassroots level, from people who are not going to stand by and continue to watch our kids fall apart and our pollinators disappear. And I wrote electromagnetic field fact sheets with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health back in 2016 that I was told would be out in 3 months. They have never seen the light of day. So we can take these, we can bring them into New Hampshire. There was a representative from the New Hampshire Department of Public Health who sat on that commission for that bill. So they know, but we need the public to make sure they follow through and protect us. So next steps, At the local level, our town should be doing these townwide safety committees. Our town should be giving everybody the right to opt out of having any of this toxic technology mounted, including the smart meters on our homes. And then we need to start getting our towns to step away from wireless and start making sure that our public spaces are safe. And every town should be working on their bylaws. And there's a checklist here at Americans for Responsible Technology to help us get there. And our town should not be shy about hiring an attorney to get this right. Andrew Campanelli used to work for the industry till he figured out what was going on. Now he represents communities and individuals, and he can take your local town bylaw for wireless communication facilities, and for, I think it's like $8,500, he can go in and take it top to bottom and tell you what you need to do to protect yourself and the citizens in your community. So don't be shy about engaging good legal representation. So I can be brought in to your towns. We've done community conversations like this, and we just want to help. So if there's anything I can do to help educate, if there's anything New Hampshire for Safe Technology can do, please just reach out. Start where you are. If you belong to professional organizations, let's start the conversations there. And here's how you can find us: out on Facebook, New Hampshire for Safe Technology. You can reach them through their email address, and the same thing for us at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So I will stop sharing here. And if anybody has any questions, if you'd like to raise your hand, we would love to answer questions. I'd like to open up the floor to Deb Hodgson, if she'd like to share a little bit about what brought her into this conversation and the work that she's doing in New Hampshire. Deb, you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, I'm Deb Hodgson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm from the Seacoast area. And I had been sick off and on, and then very sick, probably about 12 years ago. Ended up in Boston, in and out of Mass General, and thinking I had all sorts of crazy things going on, but they couldn't figure it out. And about 5 years ago was the tipping point for me, and I realized it was the wireless. I had multiple blood clots in both lungs. I had heart issues. I thought I was had early Alzheimer's. I was getting lost in a town I had lived in 30 years. I couldn't sleep. I had severe dry eyes. And once I got someone to my home and we hardwired and got rid of all our wireless, but we still have technology, my health immediately changed, even things I didn't realize had been connected. And that's how I got to the point where I thought, people think they're going to think I'm crazy. But I was so concerned about my community. My daughter's a teacher, about the children, the schools. And I thought, I really need to step out of my comfort zone and do something to try to educate people, because it does sound crazy, but it's really not. And a lot of things are simple solutions that can help a lot. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, because some people could throw up their hands and say, well, there's wireless everywhere, you can't do anything, but you can. We still can exist in it, and my health completely turned around. And I'll tell the story Cece loves, the story that 2 months after we hardwired our home, our plant grew 15 inches in our kitchen in just 2 months. And that's really what got our children's attention. They realized their mother wasn't crazy.
And that's just it. You know, it's such a lonely journey when you think
It
you're the
is.
only one that this is happening to. I see we have with us tonight Eric Windheim. Eric, if you're still with us, would you like to unmute and say a quick hello? Eric is one of our building biologists out in California. And maybe you could just teach us a little bit about what a building biologist does for training, and then what they do for people in the community.
Well, you know, first of all, I want to thank you so much, Cece, for your tireless effort. And I'm really glad somebody like you and these other people love dealing with what I call Congress critters, because you have a way of getting the point across You don't let them put words in your mouth, but somehow they continue to listen to you. Now, I don't have that much patience with those people. Mostly I go out and detect, measure, assign a risk level, and I find out what's going wrong in the house. And then I say, well, it's really quite simple. Sometimes I just turn off the main power panel and they go, wow, the pressure in my head just stopped. What does that mean? So that means there's something that's powered by electricity that's hurting you. And you just told me that. So please don't say that there's no harm here. And in fact, one case, an autistic child came out of the back bedroom and said, what's going on? The pressure in my head just stopped. And that child was 22, didn't even know I was in the house. And the unbelieving father suddenly became very humble. And he said, okay, so what do we do? Well, keep the Wi-Fi off, and your laptop computer is making horrendous amounts of dirty electricity. So about a month later, I got a really wonderful letter from the mom that said, thank you so much. My children are now healing. I feel like they have a chance at rejoining a normal life. So I see, miraculous turnarounds right in front of me, just like your plants growing, the pain going away. And I meet people that have spent up to $500,000 on their autistic children. When we fixed it, I got a letter from the mom, said, the school says my child has moved up 2 grade levels in 6 months. He can't possibly be the same child, but he is. Now he looks at us straight in the eye and can have a conversation with 2 adults at the same time, rather than looking out the window and banging his hands on the table.
Oh,
So, as building biologists, we see this kind of stuff right in front of us. And sometimes it's easy as turning off the Wi-Fi, the pool pump, the energy efficient mini split heat pump, or some other so-called green energy saving device. And like Cece said, RF is the fastest growing toxin. Everything these days is got Wi-Fi built into it, even children's toys. It's just like an invasion of ants. If you ever have a seasonal invasion of ants, this stuff is invading into your house. You're taking it home and you don't even know it's got a transmitter in it.
Oh,
So the
well,
Building
Eric,
Biology Institute has a lot of fact sheets that you can download and use them however you want.
would you be able to drop a link to that in the chat?
Sure. Yeah.
And
These
then
are ready-made things you can print up and pass out.
Yeah, I know. I've referred to your sleep sanctuary fact sheet a number of times. I think I've looked at something on solar on the Building Biology Institute website. I know there was a 5G paper that I was honored to corroborate or collaborate with Ora Miller on. And so we have so many great resources, and we're so grateful to our building biologists. You guys are the cavalry coming in house by house to help people figure out just what the heck is going on. And so we will be so grateful if we can help to educate more citizens. And we're going to continue to do these seminars a couple of times a month is our goal, until we have enough ground pressure built that we start making meaningful changes in our communities. And of course, helping our families inside their own homes. Is there anybody else who would like to raise a hand with any questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And we are so very grateful for your time. We know it's a lot to get our heads around, as Dr. Lynn Patrick, who put on the first medical conference, said, we know it's like drinking water from a fire hose when you first come into this topic. But once you get past all the facts, it simply distills down to turn off the wireless antennas and choose hardwired technology to and through the premises, and get a meter, because if you don't have a meter, you don't know when these things are going to sneak back into your living space. So thank you so much, everybody. Eric, it was a pleasure as always to see you. And please share this with others who you think would want to have this information. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, the link is in the chat.
Excellent. And we will include that when we post the video.
Okay, great.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Deb, you can probably hit the stop recording button.
Thank you.